Hey everyone, happy Halloween. This is David Brown from Birds with the migration update for the second half of October 2025 from the Ashland Hawk Watch located in northern Delaware, USA. The start of this period in mid-October marked the halfway point of our hawk watching season, and you may remember from the last video that early October, the totals were pretty low this year, but I'm happy to report that the second half of October we did pretty well. We'll get into the numbers at the end of the video, but first let's go through some photos. Let's start off with this bird. Here we see a large dark raptor. We see a relatively small head compared to the tail. We see that it's overall dark underneath, except it has white patches in the center of each wing and a white base to the tail. This was the season's first golden eagle, a nice birthday bird for Kim. Here we have a small raptor that's light underneath with very pointed wings. So a small pale falcon is an American kestrel. And from the breast markings and also the orange tail feathers, we know that this is a male. Here we have another small raptor, but on this one we don't see very pointed wingtips, but rather rounded wingtips. So this is a hawk. We see a relatively long tail, so we should be thinking Cooper's hawk or sharp-shinned hawk. It looks like all the tail feathers are pretty much the same length and a relatively small head, making this a juvenile sharp-shinned hawk. The very next day, after that first golden eagle, we had our second golden eagle of the season, another immature. You can see that nice white base to the tail, but on this one we see very little white in the wings. There's just variation in how much white they have. And this bird gave a better look. The one the first day streamed right overhead but was extremely high. This one was right overhead and only moderately high, so it gave a half decent look. Here's a quiz bird for you. Is this a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk? Well, looking at this bird, we see a very squared off tip of the tail because all of the tail feathers are the same length. We see overall a somewhat compact bird. The tail doesn't look super long. The wings don't look super long. And if we were to draw a line from the leading edge of the wings down, the head barely sticks out past that. From a distance, you would hardly see any head at all on this bird. This is another sharp-shinned hawk, but this one's an adult. We can see that orange barring underneath. Compare that to this bird. If you look at the overall proportions, it doesn't seem as compact. It just seems a little bit lankier. The tail looks a little longer. The wings are held out straight and very long. So this is a Cooper's hawk. Also notice that the tail tip is curved or rounded because the outer tail feathers are shorter than the central ones. It's a field mark you have to be careful about sometimes, depending on how the tail is. But on this one, when the tail is slightly extended, we do get that nice gradation in the length of the tail feathers. And we can see a relatively large head that sticks out further than we saw on the sharp-shinned. Let me switch back and forth between them a few times. Again, this is the Cooper's hawk. Looking back at the sharp-shinned, looking at the proportions, just more compact looking overall, and they tend to push those wrists forward. Back to the Coopers, notice that nice rounded tail because the central tail feathers are longer than the outer tail feathers, whereas the sharp-shinned, the tail feathers are the same length, giving it a more squared off tip to the tail. Looking at the underside markings, here's the Cooper's hawk. We see that it has that orange barring, and we notice the same thing on the sharp-shinned hawk. So we can't really see a difference in plumage when we're looking at the underside of the adults. I was birding along the creek with some friends and had this nice common merganser hanging out. And there's a small area of rapids on the creeks. And it was funny because he was standing on this branch and then he swam and went through the rapids, which I thought was pretty fun. And if I were a duck, I'd probably just keep doing that. Here's another quiz for you. Is this a turkey vulture or a black vulture? And I hear a lot of people at the Hawk Watch, they try to identify them based on the head. So what color head do we see on this bird? Well, we see only a gray head. We don't see any red. However, this is not a black vulture. This is indeed a turkey vulture. You can see that completely silvery trailing edge to the wings that turkey vultures have. They also have a longer silvery tail. This bird is a juvenile turkey vulture, and the juvenile turkey vultures also look very clean overall because all of their feathers are the same age, so we don't see any signs of molt in the wings. Here we have another eagle. Is this a bald eagle or a golden eagle? Well, the main thing that we look at on a bird like this is where is the white on the underside. And in this case, we have a lot of splotchy white throughout the entire undersides to the wings, but especially here in this wing pit area. If you see a lot of white right here, this is going to be a bald eagle. In fact, this is a juvenile or first year bald eagle. You can see it's got a completely brown head and the body is also brown. And speaking of birds that are brown, I raised my camera to photograph some tree swallows and then realized that they weren't tree swallows at all, but rather two northern rough-winged swallows, which are somewhat rare during the hawkwatch season and it's certainly late for them. Besides these, I haven't seen any other swallows other than tree swallows for probably more than a month now, so nice to get some rough-winged swallows moving through late. Here we have another bald eagle and a somewhat interesting plumage. It's getting close to looking like an adult, but not quite there yet. You can still see a little bit of dark here behind the eye and the nice dark tip to the tail, and still a little tiny bit of white here in the wings and body. So give this bird another year or so and it'll look like an adult. Here we have a nice cedar waxwing perched up in a tree. I like that black mask they have, very fitting for Halloween. And we're seeing flocks of cedar waxwings every day and in pretty good numbers recently. And most of them have a yellow tip to the tail, but it's my understanding that some of them develop an orange tip to the tail like this one has based on their diet. So when they eat certain berries, it might influence the color of the tip of their tail. I felt like it was getting later than most seasons and we still hadn't seen any rusty blackbirds at the Hawkwatch, but one day there was a big group of them hanging out down in the marsh here at Ashland. So after the Hawkwatch ended that day, I walked around and had a flock of about 50 rusty blackbirds perched up in the trees, which is the most I can ever remember hanging out at Ashland. And they stuck around for 1 or 2 days and then moved on. And speaking of rusty blackbirds, here's one that gave a nice flyby. You can see that rusty coloration and the light eye. And this is a bird species that's been declining pretty significantly, so it's a species we always enjoy seeing. What do you think on this one, bald eagle or golden eagle? Well, looking at this bird, we see 3 points of white, one in the center of each wing and a nice white base to the tail. We see a relatively small head with a golden back of the neck or nape. So this is indeed a golden eagle. And this was a bird that came through late in the day. I stayed late, everyone else had left. And this bird showed up around 4:30 p.m. And we just happened to have a group of non-birders walking through at the time, and many of them were visiting from Paris, France. So they got to see this bird and were pretty excited about it, and I was pretty excited about it too because we enjoy every golden eagle that we see here at Ashland. So far we've had 3 this year. Last year we only had 4 the whole season. Some weird years we've had as many as 20. So we're really coming into the peak time of them now as we're heading into November. So hopefully we'll get a bunch more over the next few weeks. And here's another look at that same golden eagle as it was coming head on with that nice evening sun setting behind me. And when they're coming head on like this with the sun shining on them, you can really see the glow of that golden nape, which is where their name comes from. Some people imagine that they're going to be a light brown color overall or something like that. People see young bald eagles that are real brown and they think that's a golden eagle. But actually, golden eagles are quite dark. It's just the gold on the back of the neck. Here we have a raptor high overhead. We see kind of long, skinny, somewhat pointed wings. We see a relatively long tail, and we see kind of a distinctive plumage. It's mostly white underneath with a lot of gray here to the throat and the head and black wingtips. This is an adult male northern harrier, sometimes called a gray ghost. Here we have a hawk, and you can probably guess what this one is. We see a dark belly band and we see dark patagial bars, and that alone is enough to tell us that it is a red-tailed hawk. And along with the red tail and the dark trailing edge to the wings, we know that this is an adult red-tailed hawk. And if you look at the eye, you can see that its nictitating membrane is half closed. That's a sort of membrane that raptors and other birds can blink to clean their eyes. Here we have another hawk in the Buteo genus, and on this one, perhaps the most distinctive thing is we see pale crescents near the wingtips, especially here on this wing, and we see streaking that pretty much starts on the upper breast. It's not a very distinct belly band, but rather streaking that starts all the way up top and goes down, and a somewhat longer tail. This is a juvenile red-shouldered hawk. We are in peak turkey vulture migration time, and we've been getting good numbers a lot of days, including up to several hundred on some days. This was a flock that we looked up, and there they were overhead in the blue sky, a really tight, large flock. This was over 100 birds total, and I only got a photo as they were going away, but thankfully Kim was smart enough to take a video with her phone. So obviously, when I count hawks in the spring up in New York, we see huge numbers of turkey vultures migrating, up to 35,000 or more over the course of the season, including days of 3,000, 4,000, somewhere in that range. But here at Ashland, if we get a couple hundred in a day, that's exciting. And this was the largest group I've ever seen at Ashland. I think I had seen groups maybe up to 60, but never a group of over 100. Here's a species that sometimes throws off birders when they come to the Hawk Watch and see them high overhead, but this is a more typical view of what birders might see, the top side view as they're hunting low to the ground. On this bird, we see long, skinny, pointed wings, we see an owl-like face, and perhaps most distinctively, we see a white rump. This is another northern harrier. Here we have another red-tailed hawk, and you can see the dark patagial bars and the belly band on this. And this bird is particularly heavily marked, which is indicative of some of the northern red tails we see showing up this time of year and may winter in our region. You can see that the patagial bars especially are quite large and thick and dark, and that the dark here on the throat as well as the throat kind of dripping onto the upper breast are other good signs that we look for the northern red tails. And here's another look at that same bird as it started to soar when it was a little farther away. Here's a raptor. We see rounded wingtips and a long tail, so we should be thinking acips, so Cooper's hawk or sharp-shinned hawk. In this case, we see a bird that has a lanky look overall. We see a rounded tip of the tail because the outer tail feathers are a bit shorter. We see wings that are held out very straight, and we see brown teardrop streaking concentrated on the upper breast. This is a juvenile Cooper's hawk. Compare that to this hawk where we see a shorter tail, so we should be thinking one of the buteos. And on this bird, we see that it's mostly orange underneath with some nice black and white bandings to the wings and tail. This is an adult red-shouldered hawk, and we've been getting some really good numbers of red shoulders lately as their migration is picking up, and early November is the peak time for them, so we'll see a lot more over the next 2 weeks. And for a nice comparison between the two species we just looked at, here we have the adult red-shouldered hawk on the top left, and below it is the juvenile Cooper's hawk. So you can see the red-shouldered hawk is quite a bit bigger, and you can see they both have banded tails, but on the red shoulder, it's more of a black tail with very thin white bands. On the Cooper's hawks, it's kind of a dark and gray bands that are more equal in size. And you can see they hold their wings in a little bit of a different posture as well, with the red-shouldered being a buteo and the Cooper's hawk being one of the former accipiters, now in the Aster genus. Here we have two bald eagles that were chasing each other around. You can see the one on the right is a full adult, and the one on the left is pretty close to being an adult. We can see a dark tip to the tail and still some white to the underside. Here's another water bird that we've started to see the past few weeks, and these are pretty distinctive to pick out. This one actually came through relatively low. Often they're really high when we see them, but they have a pretty distinctive shape with those really thin pointed wings, and they have kind of a distinctive cadence to their flap. This is a common loon. This time of year, we're always hoping for some winter finches, and I heard a call of a bird that was coming that sounded reminiscent of a house sparrow call, which to me always means to be on the lookout for evening grosbeaks. So when I looked up and saw this bird and just snapped off some photos and then could see the white patches in the wings, that confirmed that this is an evening grosbeak. There have not been many evening grosbeaks reports in the region yet. Up in New England there have been, but Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, not too many yet. So I don't know if it'll end up being a good fall for them or not, but I was pretty lucky that I was able to capture this one flying over. And speaking of songbirds, let's take a look at a couple others we're seeing quite a few of right now. Here we have a warbler, and maybe the most distinctive thing is this little yellow patch to the side. And also they have a somewhat distinctive tail pattern with this black and white. This is a yellow-rumped warbler. And here we have another finch that we're seeing a ton of right now. It definitely seems to be an eruption year for these. It's kind of a large, chunky finch with a lot of streaking. This bird's brown overall. It's either an immature or a female. And we see a very forked tail. Those are all good field marks for purple finch. Here we have another vulture. Is this a black vulture or a turkey vulture? On this bird, we see that grayish black head, but as we saw earlier, that doesn't always help us out a lot. But on this bird, if we look at the shape, it's a very compact shape, especially the very short tail. And we see that the white in the wings is only out at the wingtips. It's a dark trailing edge to the wings otherwise, making this a black vulture. And with today being Halloween, I didn't dress up, but I did put on a goofy little hat along with Kim, and we took a selfie with our skeleton mascot Bones. Taking a look at hawk count for the total results for October 2025 from Ashland. Again, the first half of the month, pretty low totals, only a handful of days where we had over 100 migrants. But as we got into the second half of the month, it was the opposite, only a handful of days with less than 150 migrants. You can see a couple day stretch here towards the beginning of the period. Then we had a 9-day stretch where we were getting hundreds of birds every day. Good turkey vulture numbers, but also really good numbers of bald eagles and sharpies and red tails, red shoulders. And then 2 days here at the end that were less favorable. Yesterday it rained almost the whole day. I only went out for 2 hours at the very end of the day when the sun started to pop out. And then today we just had really strong winds that held back the flight a little bit. But overall for the month of October, we had just over 4,000 migrants and bringing the season total to 8,720. Comparing October this year to previous Octobers, there's quite a few species that were on the low end. I've only counted 35 black vultures during the month compared to hundreds other months. It just doesn't seem like there's that many around, and there's not that many that are obviously migrating. Turkey vulture numbers have been pretty good, up over 2,000 for the month. Osprey numbers were really low for October, and most of them come through earlier, but only 16 compared to 74 in October last year. Bald eagle numbers are pretty good. Harriers are maybe a little on the low end overall, although we've still been getting a few every day, it seems. Sharpie numbers, relatively low, but we made up for it a bit at the end of the month, but it was just so slow at the beginning of the month. Coopers were a little more average. Red shoulder numbers aren't up at record high numbers, but it's a respectable total of 210. We had 46 broadwings towards the beginning of the month. Red tail numbers are starting to pick up. It's hard to judge them based on their October total. 3 golden eagles is definitely a respectable total. You can see we had 5 of them back in 2023, and that's the year we ended up with 20 total. But yeah, usually around 2-3 is average for October. Some years more than that, but hopefully we'll get a bunch more here into November. And then as we look at the falcons, pretty low on the kestrels, only 80. If we compare that to previous years, that looks like the lowest October total ever. Merlins on the low end, but within range of what we've been getting other recent years. And peregrines were really low, I think tied for the lowest October ever with only 4. You can see last year we had 14 peregrines in October. And so overall, the season total is kind of where it should be. We look at the October total, just over 4,000 birds. That puts us within range of the past couple years, 4,100 birds, 4,018. We're almost exactly where we were 2 years ago. So there's so much variation overall in the season totals just based on how many broadwings we get. And it's hard to judge the October total sometimes year to year because there's variation on if you get some birds in September rather than early October, or do you get birds in early November rather than late October? So I wouldn't read into too much, but definitely it seems like some species are below where we should be at this point, and we'll probably end up with a low season total for those. All right, we have one more month left of the Ashland Hawk Watch. We run daily through the end of November, including on Thanksgiving, so maybe you can come out and visit us before the end of the season. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching, and happy Halloween.